You know how they always go.
Compared. Yes. Yeah. So you're going first.
I have rights and that's just really something. And when you see it on the sheet. That's the plan.
Kathy and I keep talking to them. Her brother lives near you.
That's the I did it.
It's even share.
Right where the gate has stopped.
Yeah.
Preferably for my.
Yeah.
There you go.
There you go.
I went out to one.
Do you want to keep it?
Yeah. In 2000.
I was in the PT group.
Oh,
You want a friend? I can't believe it.
And my we went to this. Awful. Anyway. And it was sponsored by Marlboro Savings.
Yeah.
I woke up every morning, it's yeah.
Because you just got back, but they won't have any better.
Oh, yeah.
I told her, I said,
And it's like evening.
"We're selling the house."
You want to stay there? All that's gonna be.
You guys ready to start?
Yeah.
Great. Appreciate you guys making the trip in. Looks like we got a few on Zoom as well. Really want to thank Doug. We were able to connect to actually one of your agents. And we're doing a little trade-off. So we know that all of you have been asking for some Maryland review. I can't do it. So we brought in the professional Doug Rubin. He's down at the Towson Market Center in Keller Williams. Been doing it for about 2 years, you said. And then I'm gonna go to his office on Thursday. So Doug, it's all yours.
Appreciate that, Ryan. Hi, good morning. Again, my name is Doug Rubin. I am the broker of record for Colorman's Legacy in Towson. I am also a licensed attorney in Maryland and Virginia. I am also on the State Forms Committee for the Maryland Association of Realtors. So I get a little bit of a sneak peek, sort of what's coming and hopefully some context that explains some of, what we've decided to do in Maryland. One caveat is that, as I expect is the case in Pennsylvania, that a whole bunch of crap is about to change in light of the NAR settlement. So Maryland, I think literally this week is going to start distributing educational draft versions of forms that'll hopefully go into effect in August. So I'll try to highlight the extent that there are little changes. I'll try to highlight those for you guys. So how many folks have actually done a transaction in Maryland?
How do we?
Have completed, or are doing. How has your experience been generally? Great, perfect.
Mine went very smooth. I mean, I had a lot of help from in the office here. I had access to the forms.
Okay, perfect.
And they were actually moving up to PA.
Okay.
So, I had another one that we couldn't get the contract with.
Okay.
My buyer wanted to have some contingencies put in, and I talked about that it was through a Zoom meeting with another. We were reviewing contract forms, and I asked a question about some of the contingencies my buyer wanted to put in, and the person doing the meeting said, "You should probably talk to an attorney. You can't put that in there." All he wanted them to pay for the perk test, and then if the perk test came back good, he would reimburse them.
I mean, you can do that. Yeah, I guess technically, you draft that sort of an addendum, which we do all, and is sort of practicing law, right? So maybe that's what he's getting at, which is like pretty much anytime you use a blank addendum, I'm supposed to chastise you for practicing law, so you have to do your job. So yeah, good luck with that. So generally, I think Maryland, there are some kind of positives and some negatives compared to the Pennsylvania forms. I'm sort of familiar with Pennsylvania forms and the DC forms. When I speak to people and brokers that are licensed in multiple places, they're usually like, Maryland is really the toughest nut to crack in terms of just so many different agenda that you just need to kind of magically know when to use them, right? So the hope is that you have a competent agent on the other side of you that's going to kind of help out, isn't just objectively mean about it and make you feel bad for not providing X, Y, or Z. And also people in Maryland aren't always entirely sure what they should be using either. So I expect there are, not the most competent people in Pennsylvania also that you might see on the other side that might include things that also. So what we're gonna do is I'm gonna maybe bias things towards the buyer side because I'm gonna assume maybe at least in our office center, it's more, hey, I might have a buyer that's looking in Maryland, but then suddenly they want to look over the Pennsylvania line. And then like, okay, how do we make sure we're do that? So we'll talk about listings a little bit at the very end. So we'll kind of focus on the buyer side. So the very first page that's on the printout, hopefully everybody was able to get a copy, is just this checklist that my office came up with that I think is pretty helpful. I'll kind of roll through it slowly so the YouTube crowd can screenshot as needed. But generally speaking, let's go through it quickly. You're going to need a contract of sale, right? Typically, if you're going to be using some type of financing, you need a separate financing addendum, right? So that's either going to be a conventional financing addendum, FHA, or USDA are all separate pieces of papers. Figure out which one applies and you attach it to that document. Importantly, the appraisal contingency is lumped into those financing addenda. So that's all lumped into there. Often you're going to use your inspection if you think you can get away with it, which is again a separate addendum, which we're going to go through. There is something called a general addendum, which you're going to want to include in every instance, and that's really just kind of a boilerplate document that protects everybody. And then in the event that you have well or septic, there's extra addenda that you're going to want to include there as well. There's also a whole bunch of stuff that we hope is going to be properly provided as a downloadable document for the sellers, right? So they are going to include, if you scroll down, exclusions. It just says, hey, what's actually coming with this property that I'm buying? This is going to be, refrigerators, drapes, that sort of stuff. There's going to be in just about every instance a jurisdictional disclosure of some kind. So you need to look up what county am I in? If I'm in Harford County, Baltimore County, Howard County. You pretty much just go to the MAR library and you find the Baltimore County disclosures, Baltimore City disclosures, Harford County disclosures. It's pretty easy most of the time. If you get into like Montgomery County or on the Eastern Shore, it gets a little bit wackier, but most of the ones that are kind of adjacent to where you guys live, just kind of find the correct one and slap it in. If the house is built before 1978, you need to make sure that the sellers have filled out their lead paint disclosure properly. And then there are a few other more kind of niche ones, like the deferred water and sewer. That's going to apply if, I expect you guys have these as well. If it's sort of a newer construction development, the developer says, hey, this is really expensive to put in plumbing and sewage, you guys. I really should be reimbursed for that from the developer. So I'm going to put a lien on the development that every subsequent owner needs to basically pay me back over time. It's a great scheme.
Do they do that in every county?
Yes,
Okay.
but it will be recorded in the public record if it's a thing. And the seller has to disclose it.
Okay.
And it's actually, there's sort of scary language in the contract. If the seller fails to disclose that, the buyer can like sue to basically bring the entire thing through. for like the term limit. Like so if you have a listing, you need to cover yourself as an agent, be like, do you have a deferred water and sewer? Like, it will be an extra bill that they receive every year. It's usually, a few $100s. So just make sure you kind of are covering yourself and are asking the right question. Accelerate. Figure this out.
My favorite too.
Yeah.
For 5 years, I've been messing with that thing.
Perfect. All right. So I'm in good company. Those contract is with the documents that aren't going to be included, but you will likely encounter at some point. We have something called the property inspection notice. So we have the property inspection addendum, which says, I would like X, Y, and Z inspections, and this is my contingency. But then when you're actually negotiating that contingency, say, hey, here's the repair requests, that's going to sit on the PIN, property inspections notice. So the PIN is actually what you send back to them saying, hey, these are my requested repairs. Please, Mr. Seller, you have X number of days to respond, and then that's the document that you use to negotiate back and forth. So we're going to spend a lot of time on that one. Yes.
When you send that, supposed to send the inspection report as well.
Depending on what you're asking for, according to a contract. Yes, in almost every instance. We'll spend a lot of time on the inspection stuff. And then as far as the internal stuff, when you have a buyer, you're going to have your brokerage agreement, and there's also a consumer notice that you're going to want to attach to that every single time. And that mostly is just to kind of protect your butt as the agent. Okay. Let's just kind of get into it. You're excited? We can sort of fill out a contract and see. All right, so I'm going to thread the needle and give you lots of information, but not too much information. I am not always perfect at this, so please tell me to either slow down or hurry up as be appropriate. So here's your exclusive buyer tenant brokerage agreement. This is the document that allows you to be their fiduciary, their representative, and also set forth how you get paid. Fill out the basic information at the top. I usually just leave paragraph 3 blank. I'm not sure what it really accomplishes. Okay, Maryland law did just change as it relates to paragraph 4. So you need an effective date and you need a termination date, where it will automatically sunset. What just changed is that it cannot be for a term longer than 1 year under any circumstance. That includes extensions. Okay, that's a sort of important caveat. So let's say you can still put it for 1 year. That's what a lot of people do. That's perfect. Let's say a year goes by, they still haven't bought a house. Do not extend that with like a change of terms or any kind of addendum. You need to actually get them to sign a brand new. Okay. So it has to have a termination date and it cannot be more than a year away. Thank you to declaring on page 2. Okay. Never mind. Page 2 is very important. Would you guys like to get paid when you work with your buyers? So I'm going to spend a little bit of time on this because this is obviously been the heavily scrutinized portion for this new exciting lawsuit world that we live in. So this sets forth, in the event of sale, compensation to be paid by buyer to broker shall be blank. What have you guys been putting in that field in this area? Okay. Okay. Love that. How many people of us were trained at some stage to write per MLS or seller to pay or something like that? Don't do that. Under no circumstances is that an acceptable way to set forward your compensation. Basically, the whole point of this lawsuit was it was kind of a rigged system where the seller just pays for everything. So the buyer, we certainly pretended that everything was free for the buyer. You need to be extremely clear, extremely transparent about what your payment amount is. And this language is actually changing. So they're not going to give you a lot of opportunity to put in like flowy language here. You basically can put a percentage. You can put a percentage plus an admin fee. Or if you want to, you can just put kind of a flat fee like, hey, I'm going to charge $5,000 for real estate transactions. It's going to be $5,000. Yes.
When you put the commission,
Yeah.
if the seller has agreed to pay the buyer, do you put the total commission? Or the?
Yes. So,
Okay.
because remember, this is before, hypothetically, this is kind of before you're even looking at houses, right? So you need to set forward, and when the new regulations go into place, you have to have this in place before you can show a house, right? That's going to be the law. So that's best practice. Now it's law, okay? You're going to put your total compensation here, okay? This is what you're going to be paid. Now, if you scroll down to 8, it sort of sets forth that, hey, the seller. So A says, buyer, you pay me X. If that's 2.5%, 3%, plus whatever. I'm gonna say 2.5% plus a $4.95 admin fee. This is what I shall be paid. Either you pay it, Mr. Buyer, or maybe the seller's gonna help you out. I think they're going to, maybe they would. If they do, this sets forward that whatever the seller receives will just offset what you set forward. And so if you put 2.5%, and the seller is paying 2.5%, my services, the buyer doesn't need to bring extra cash to the table. But if it was 2.5% plus an admin fee, the buyer is still on the hook for that admin fee because the seller's, it's just credit against whatever you put in ATAG. This is now kind of the old language where in Maryland as of today, if I put 2.5% in 8A and the seller's willing to pay me 3%, bully for me, I get to take 3%. Great news. After the settlement goes into effect, that is not the case. You are not allowed to take any of that overage anymore, okay? So if I put 2.5%, and even if they're offering 3, I can only take 2.5%. So whatever you put, what's that?
Like, what is the point of that?
Just to be mean to real people.
Well, my question is, how are they regulating that? Like, is somebody looking at these contracts? Like, is someone from title gonna be looking at this and?
That's gonna be really interesting. Because title needs to protect themselves as well. If they start compensating people, they can run afoul of the court order potentially. So I expect title companies will be asking for your buyer agency agreements.
So I have a question too. So like the Pennsylvania contract, when we have this, it says like this percentage or this fee, whichever is greater.
Right.
So would you be allowed to write language like that in that line?
I believe the answer is no. Because
Like it'll say like 2.5% or $4,000, whichever is greater. Because like when I'm working with you, you know, some people like the price ranges are lower.
Right.
And you get into this like, oh yay, $1,000 and I work with you for 6 months.
I think the answer is no. We're gonna see. So as I am interpreting the lawsuit, it's basically anything that's open-ended really in any way, they don't like that. They want you to say, my value is X, I am charging X, okay? There's not even gonna be space to really write that stuff. There's like a checkbox and you can write down a number.
That's how it is in the PA contract.
Okay.
And
so
it
you're
literally
just
has
adding
that
stuff.
verbiage like this, whichever is greater. So, or if the seller pays me more, I'm taking that, right there.
Yeah. It's a part, what the settlement is like. Agent shall not receive anything more than what you put in AA. If you are bound by that, you cannot receive anything more.
As negotiations go on, can we renegotiate that? Like, let's say like this funds are really tight, like, you know what, I'm gonna take off like $1,500 off my commissions that you can get this. We're allowed to go down, but we're not allowed to go up.
Okay.
That was my appreciation, like
Sounds like a mean step there.
some of the, yeah, because I'm the one that made this law. We're going to see exactly how some of this pans out, and I promise in the next 6 months. Best practices are gonna be adopted and forms are still gonna change, and we're gonna figure out. What the lawsuit actually meant, and some people are saying things are disallowed that might be slightly, so we're gonna figure it out. But right now, I'm erring on the side of. Listened to a webinar the other day with. Wright's chief legal counsel, and they were basically saying like, look. This is not something that we can be cute about as an industry, this lawsuit. Like, this is a court order. And if people violate this, it's not just a slap on the wrist. It's like you can be held in criminal contempt of court. This is something that the brokerages need to be really strict about. Bright needs to be really strict about, the local agencies and they are. We all need to kind of take this very seriously. So right now. My answers are all gonna be like on the very, very conservative side, like we need to be hyper diligent. But look, people are gonna come up with creative ways.
Ryan,
Yeah, I appreciate that. As an industry, we're good at finding that being creative and kind of figuring some stuff out, but. Yeah, I mean, maybe that we step her occasionally. Maybe you're overstepping.
So I just want to clarify, if I like negotiated with my buyers that I want to be paid 3% plus my broker's fee, I write that in 8A. Is what I'm asking for is 3%. If the seller is offering 2.5%, do I have to hold my buyer accountable for that last 0.5%? Okay,
I can.
okay,
So that may be the answer,
okay,
right? 5% in it, to make sure you're not leaving money on the table. Except maybe it's gonna scare away some buyers. but-
yeah. Right.
You could have like a little weak wing,
Pretty much.
you know, but you know. I know it says 3%, if you're only over 2%, I'm not gonna sue you for the 3% sort of.
Yeah.
So I expect that, as I said, you can waive down, you can't necessarily.
Okay, so to be safe, I would.
Right, but you just need to have a very candid conversation with your buyers, because if you put 4% there. The language is scary, it says buyer shall pay 4%,
Yeah.
like, I would. If I don't think you're paying 4%, right, so that's gonna be where we're gonna need to get really good at. Demonstrating our value, it's not just providing value, it's showing, and that's. Not to go too off the rails, but that's maybe where NAR and we as an industry just haven't done a good job. Like, we have not explained why we're worth, why buyers agents should be compensated. And like, a lot of the theme of the briefs that I was reading about this lawsuit and general consensus is like, there, you just don't really do anything. People can buy their own houses online. Like, I don't know why they're getting paid so much. It's just kind of like, we're just leeches that are just taking people's money, basically. So that's what we're up against. Plus the HGTV open the door 3 times, they pick one house, then that's perfect. That's what we're up against. So we need to get really, really, really good at explaining our value. And this is how you should run a business, right? A lot of us have just been kind of saying like, you know, whatever the seller provides, that's what. It's not actually a rational way to run a business. So you should say, I'm worth X. This is why. When we get to the settlement table, this is what I'm being paid. Seller's paying me or you're paying me. That's sort of how the conversation needs to go. So with that fun stuff, so that's really the sort of bread and butter of the buyer agency agreement. Any other questions about that? Sir?
A1. The normal period of time they put in there, 90 days.
Oh, right. Thank you for that. So this is the
It's in the Pennsylvania agreement too. You got a procuring cause there and all of a sudden your agreement ends. Then they go use another agent or you still procuring cause.
Yeah, so this is, I call this the don't screw me over paragraph, or like the let's be cool paragraph, like. So I put it, it's whatever number that you can sort of justify. When I started, I was trying to put 180 days. Like, you can't fire me at the 11th hour and expect to cut me out of the deal, basically. I think like 60 or 90 is probably the most, probably the standard. But yeah, put a big number there. I don't shy away from that. Or there's just a consumer notice where if you get the buyer agency agreement, you need to also get this consumer notice. This is just a CYA for you. It's basically saying, hey, real estate is kind of scary. There's all this crap you need to be aware of, the buyer. So sign this saying that we talked to you about it. And then, you know, if they get pissed about smoke detector laws later or HOA reserve studies later, you can say, hey, you know, you had an opportunity to ask questions about this. All right, let's get into it, you guys. Sale.
Is this the order you first to your buyer? Like like, typically we do consumer notice first here.
So the consumer notice in Pennsylvania is a little bit different than it is in Maryland. In Maryland, it's just kind of like candidly, most Maryland buyers probably don't even include the consumer notice. Still, it's an important thing, as I said, to cover you as the agent, but I just get it signed at the exact same time as your buyer agency agreement. Like those should all, it's just an attachment to that. They should always be stamped at the same time.
On that consumer notice, quick question. I've heard this before. Down there, deposit held by escrow agent, is there an addendum in Maryland for that? Because I know that's kind of an unknown thing in Pennsylvania. But the rules aren't the same if you throw it in escrow. Is there a form for that?
Yes, so the Maryland Brokers Act provides all these parameters for the escrow. We call it the earnest money deposit. Is that the same here? Okay. Earnest money has to be held in a very specific way and can only be released in very specific ways, and that's all laid out in the Maryland Real Estate Brokers Act. Okay. The Maryland Real Estate Brokers Act applies to brokerages. So if your escrow is being held by a brokerage, whether it's us or whether it's Keller Williams or anybody else, you don't need any extra addendum. Okay.
Right.
If it is being held by a title company, they are not governed by the Maryland Real Estate Brokers Act. So then you do need a separate escrow agreement, which basically just copies and pastes the Maryland Brokers Act and says this applies to,
That's
to this particular transaction. So yes, if you're working with a title company, there is an extra document. Thank you. Yes.
The other, there's a document that says understanding who real estate agents represent.
Yes. That is a Maryland required form that is, if you are working with someone who has not signed your brokerage agreement. Okay, so it may be that somebody doesn't want to sign a brokerage agreement for any reason, but still wants you to show them a house. Okay, you need to present that understanding who agents represent. This is just a protection. During sort of through the history of the industry, buyers were kind of duped where they thought that people were representing them, but they were actually representing the sellers. So this is just saying, until you sign a brokerage agreement, I don't actually represent your best interests, right? So there's sort of a presumption that you're actually working for the seller. So it's really important to say, if you have a listing and an unrepresented buyer comes up to you and starts asking questions or maybe wants to submit an offer, you hand that form immediately. I don't represent you. The understanding who agents represent us is, hey, until we get a brokerage agreement in place, that we just need to be crystal clear who represents who. Yes.
How's implied agency in Maryland? Or verbal agency if you're out and explaining this to people verbally, because in Pennsylvania, you're allowed to do it verbally. They recommend paper, but
So explain the concept of implied agency.
looks like, acts like is.
Okay. So that's sort of, that's how I look at, so when I went to law school, that's basically how I trained as well. It's essentially, if somebody thinks you're their lawyer, then you're their lawyer, basically.
Well, that's what I mean. I mean, it's easy to have that conversation, just to make sure they understand. By the way, until you say yes, I work the other end.
So at the first face-to-face meeting in that relationship, you're supposed to provide them with the understanding of agents record.
Okay.
So I love that piece and put it in your wallet. Stand it to people.
Like the prayer.
Yeah, exactly.
Then that page would be good and signed until they actually sign.
No, you only need the understanding whom basically makes it clear that you can't represent both sides. Okay, but it's if you don't represent either side yet, then you don't really need it. So in your situation, you're talking about, so you don't have a plan. You're just there for a listing presentation.
Conversation is maybe, so.
Okay, so understanding whom agents represent doesn't apply because you don't represent anybody yet. Like you literally have no role in this transaction until you get a listing, until you get that listing agreement signed, you're not even in the transaction. To do what?
Agent for the seller.
Okay. You're nothing until you get that piece of paper signed.
So you
Until they list-
don't do this, just go ahead and
Get the listing agreement signed. Get the listing agreement signed. Get the listing agreement signed.
Okay.
Get the listing agreement. Many of Maryland agents do that too. It is almost never required unless you are interacting with a non-client and they're like asking you questions. You're like, no, I don't represent. This is the CYA, I represent the seller, not you, Mr. Buyer.
Are people using these frequently in Maryland? Like, I'm thinking about if I'm like hosting an open house, like if I should have multiple copies of this piece of paper available.
So we have I think the answer is no, and the reason the answer is no is
It's
because you
that's
have
fine.
that disclosure. Yeah, there's the Maryland open house disclosure that says like bright lights, I don't represent it.
Yeah.
So that's why you don't. need
That kind of covers.
Yes.
You have to have that.
If you have a Maryland open house, there is a Maryland disclaimer that must be published prominently using the MAR letterhead in color, not modified. You need that piece of paper. The more you know. Okay. Let's get into the contract. All right, figure out buyer seller name. You guys can figure that part out. First exciting paragraph is section 6. Do you guys have ground rent? It's the stupidest thing. Okay, so ground rent, I think it only exists in like Maryland, New Jersey, and Hawaii or something. It's like this very antiquated. It's a very scary thing, or it sounds scary, right? It sounds like there's a landlord that owns the earth under you and they're gonna, and you need to check with the landlord before you dig a hole, right? We don't need to go into it a ton. It is mostly not a big deal. It is a very annoying, very small amount that you need to pay to this third party. It's like $90 a year or something that you just pay for the privilege of owning the house. They don't have a single thing to say about your house. They can't tell you can or can't do anything. It's just like a little bit of investment for them and it's like investment companies buy up these ground rents and then you have to pay them some amount of money.
How do you know if the property is subject to ground rent?
It needs to be disclosed by the seller and it's on the public record.
Okay.
So there's a place to check on like the State Department of Assessment and Taxation where you can see if there's ground rent associated. When you
That's
go,
common, you're saying?
our city is like common.
Yes.
In surrounding counties, it is less common. But yes, it is a thing. Also, when you do go under contract for a house that has ground rent, you have an opportunity to redeem that ground rent, and some people just like pay this a-hole off the side money every year, like, I'm just gonna redeem it. So it just becomes a math problem, basically. If it's $90 a year and it's $4,000 to redeem, it's a lot of years you could sit there. But if you're gonna be buried in that house and you're gonna own it for 40 years, yeah, you should redeem the ground rent. So ground rent is the first kind of wacky thing in there. So those are the two options. You need to check fee simple, which is they own the property, or it is subject to ground rent. Those are the two types of ownership. And that'll be listed on the MLS for type of ownership. You'll see fee simple or ground rent. Payment terms. You're going to put your purchase price, your earnest money in 8A. You will either check that your buyer has delivered or will deliver a certain amount of money to a certain place. Almost never do not check has delivered. That means that at the time of me submitting this piece of paper, they have already submitted the earnest money. You don't really do that. It's usually, you're going to say, they will deliver it, I promise. You can put down a time period here and it shall not be greater than 7 days. 7 days is the statutory minimum. So you'll need to put 7 there. If you're really in a competitive situation and you're trying to squeeze every bit of water from that stone, you can say, no, we really want this house. I'm going to submit it in 2 days. Like, not a huge thing, but you want to submit, and then you're going to say, hey, you're going to submit it by check, and it's going to be held either by a brokerage or a title company. There's also a spot for an additional deposit. This is really rare. This is like if you wanted to do extra non-refundable deposit on top of the EMD, something like that. So 8B here is usually left blank. All deposits to be held by, here you're going to put your brokerage or your title company, and it is always, always, always going to be in a non-interest bearing account. Do not know why there is even an option for an interest bearing. Check the first. How much time should we dedicate to deposits? Is that like a big fight about when the contract falls apart, you have to fight about the deposits? In Maryland, it's a huge mess. They just changed the law. So in almost every instance, the escrow agent, whether it's a broker or the title company, is not going to release it with a piece of paper that says buyer and seller agree this is going to be released to X. What that resulted in is a whole bunch of just like pissed off petty people saying, well, I'm not going to agree to release it. And then it just sits in an escrow account for decades and the buyer just got it screwed.
Does that really happen?
Absolutely.
That is crazy.
Yeah, people be petty.
So
Yeah, so Maryland just changed the law so that buyers have a little bit more power. If you terminate due to a specific statutory designated contingency, basically something that's deadline driven. If you cancel during an inspection, if you cancel during the HOA review period, then there's like an expedited way to get your EMD. Where you have to put things in writing, and then the broker has to basically give it back unless the other side files for mediation, gets that mediation notice notarized, sends it to the other side. So it actually is pretty hard to hold up with me. As long as you really clearly terminate due to one of those contingencies. Importantly, financing is not amongst those listed contingencies. So if it falls out due to financing, you still have to get an agreed release from the other party.
The brokers get involved then?
Yes, but yeah, I mean, I spend a lot of my life talking about earnest money. Now, the problem is, if it's a situation where parties just need to agree and sign it, I can't put a gun to anybody's head and force a buyer or a seller to sign anything. So that's often where we formatting got screwed up. But here are all the different addenda that you will get to include to your contract. Now, what's nice about this can kind of be a checklist for you, right? As you go through it, if you don't know what that addendum is, you look it up and you say, is there any way that this could apply? And pull it up and review it if you have to, right? We'll go through kind of some of the big ones. Gosh, how much time to spend? Okay. I'll just explain some of the ones that are a little bit more common or a little bit more confusing. Okay. One of these is called an additional as-is provisions. This is the true, I as a buyer am taking this as is. This is saying, I don't care if you leave property in the house. I don't care if it's not vacant. I don't care if it's clean. I just want the house. So this is like a form that you can use to really, really strengthen your offer. Be like, just give me the keys and I'll take it. And that's really compelling maybe for an investment situation. If you're buying a house that's full of crap, like it's a hoarder situation, a seller might need this basically because they don't have the capacity to get other stuff out of it. The ATU/BAT on-site sewage disposal. This is like a fairly niche thing that the seller actually has to disclose that there is this special kind of septic called best available technology. So you'll just need to make sure that that's included. Let's see. Disclosure of licensee status. If you are representing a client and you are a close family member, you need to say that you are related to that person. I don't know if Pennsylvania has a similar disclosure. And you'll have to kind of check. I think it's literally your parents, your children, I think your siblings, but not like your cousins. Like there's at a certain point that you don't have to disclose it.
We don't have disclosure for them. They're supposed to disclose it, right? Say that I'm in trouble.
Well, we're gonna create an extra form for you because we love you're related to everyone.
Well, my brother buys a lot of houses and I'm just like, hey, it's my brother.
Yeah, so you'll just need to, so you actually don't even, you just say the checkbox is I have a relative, like it's fairly, you don't actually have to say exactly.
Do they go into like how far or we have to know that? Like you said.
Yes, look, if you are related to the person, pull up this disclosure, read it quickly, and it'll say, oh yeah, this either applies or.
Okay.
Yeah. If there's lead-based paint, that needs to be disclosed, and that's something, again, the seller actually is going to go ahead and disclose for you. Most of these are seller disclosures. What is FERPTA? God, FERPTA is probably beyond the scope of this particular class. FERPTA is a foreign, yeah, it has to do with the, it is a really complicated tax provision that has to do with foreign sellers where they want to make sure that Uncle Sam is getting paid. Okay, we're gonna go into, there's a notice of buyer seller property disclosure law. We're gonna spend some time on that in a minute. Property inspections will likely apply if you have a septic system. You need to check the box for on-site sewage disposal. If there's ground rent, you need to check that. If you want to use an escalation clause. If your purchase is contingent on the sale of another residence, you need to check the box for sale, finance, or settlement of other real estate. If you're asking for the seller to kick in some money, i.e. closing costs, if you know at the time of offer that you need 3% closing cost help, you would put that in a seller contribution.
How does that work if you don't find out?
If you don't find out until after.
But if you don't know, then you find me something.
Yes, yeah, for sure. So yes, so seller contribution is sort of a catch-all where it can either be at the beginning, it can be in the middle, it can be at the end. So for instance, if you have, you're going through the inspection process, you've done a whole bunch of crap, seller doesn't want to do anything, just says, hey, I'll give you $4,000 to take care of this stuff. You would then put in the seller contribution addendum saying, hey, seller, give me $4,000. So yeah. Yep. Okay. Any other questions, just kind of looking over this list before I promise we'll dive into some of the big ones in more detail. Cool. Yes.
Where is the acceptance by both people? Like you have. You're writing a contract and you need to know within 24 hours. Where's that on the contract?
Yeah, can you explain that a little bit more? I'm sorry.
Like we have on our contracts, yeah. You wrote the contract and you want to know if you got the property. Yeah. Like
So-
you got it.
Built in, there is no, this offer is self-destruct in 48 hours. Now, that's a very common tactic that people use, and it's just a part of the, it's just a part of the offer. So as the buyer agent, I would say, here's the contract, let me know in 48 hours, or I'm withdrawing.
Okay, so you can do that.
Absolutely,
So
yeah,
you could just tell them that, okay.
yeah. That's also not necessarily binding. You can say I'm gonna withdraw in 48 hours, but then really, you need an offer and acceptance and delivery technically to be a. So if I offer you something, and you can say, hey, look, you can accept this in the next 48 hours. If 48 hours goes by, you say, I am now withdrawing my offer, it's no longer an offer that is being accepted. Offer it.
It's just verbal. It's just verbal.
I would put it in writing, by email. But yeah, it's just.
There's no addendum for that. It's wild. What about that? There's a addendum for
Yes,
everything.
I know it's a
Yeah.
county form. I received one of my offers. I don't even think it was. Anne Arundel has one, but not every county has one. I've looked for them for other counties. They don't exist.
That
You can. You can absolutely do it, something that actually is done.
Oh.
I'm glad that the language exists, where that's been vetted by somebody. Maryland Association of Realtors does not have a form for it, and not built into the contract. Would either need to just make it verbal, or put it in writing as more just an informal sort of communication, or you can put something in writing. So this, presumably this is similar to what you're describing. The offer shall be automatically withdrawn, the offer is not accepted by X hour on X date. You kind of,
the annoying part about
what is?
the county. They had different paperwork.
So for the most part, you need to, there's going to be a jurisdictional notice that each county has. You have to have that one. Then each individual region will kind of have like, hey, these are the forms that we think will be.
You see, like Anne Arundel had it.
Well, right, but that's totally actual. Like I in Baltimore County has some stuff that doesn't have, but again, but almost none of those are required forms. This is the,
So they could have just sent an email.
they could have just sent an email, a blank addendum, that same verbiage. That is never required.
Right, definitely be in it.
Under the MAR, except there's at least one jurisdictional disclosure that we can need from every county. Okay. This one,
But you get that.
Yes.
yes.
Some of them say you have to belong to a local association to get the documents.
So the one you should probably be a part of is GBBR, the Greater Baltimore Board of Realtors. And they have, if you scroll to the bottom, it says also for use for these other things. So it's sort of the surrounding things. The ones you're still cut off from are, there's some Eastern Shore nonsense and there's some DC and DC suburb nonsense. They're all very protectionist. If you want those forms, you need to pay some extra money to get access to it.
The good thing about GDPR is they told me just join MAR because we sent all of our forms over. So that was great. I didn't have to join both.
How do you? Because Maryland and Pennsylvania are different, so there's one, so that's interesting feedback that I don't think I've actually heard. In Maryland, I believe you do have to be a part of a local association. And that local association,
I had to be a part of the Maryland Association of Realtors.
so maybe it's that, and I wonder if you have reciprocity, there's kind of a workaround, because for native Maryland agents, the only way to get MAR is to join a local.
Right.
So you join DVR, they pay for MAR and MA.
But if you're reciprocity, you don't have to. You can just join MAR. Yeah, you can join any of the other ones that you want to.
And then for your sort of e-signature, do you have access? I don't know what you guys use, if it's
DocuSign.
When you join MAR, does it give you GBBR library and Arundel County Library?
No, this gives you all of MAR, but GBBR said that I called and she said, don't join, because if it's just for documents, we send all of our documents to MAR. Not every local does, but that's what we said. So,
I would, yeah.
You might not be able to get like a template on Dotloop or DocuSign, but those forms, I believe, are still available online. You just have to pull them and download them, and then unfortunately, you have to go in and add a text
Yeah.
box to everything that you
some
want
of
to
them
add.
are.
Or probably not gonna get that if you just. So if you're doing any business in Maryland, I would recommend joining GBBR, which will give you access to all the local courts. And there are, but apparently you don't necessarily need it, right? So if you can probably get 96% of the way there for almost all transactions, just joining MAR.
Those county forms that you're talking about, the one